All right, great to be here. Thank you everyone for making time for this today. And from such a wide geographical spread, I was keeping my eye on the chat there. We've got people from Cornwall to Melbourne via Kabul. So yeah, really looking forward to discussing this with you. So I'm Kat. I am currently Dean for Research Culture at the University of Leeds. I'm also an academic. I'm a Professor of Language Development, working across psychology, linguistics and education. And today I'm going to be reflecting on 4 years as institutional lead for research culture. As the theme suggests today, it's going to be a very practical focus on what's worked for us in research culture. As my sort of source material, I'll be drawing on those 4 years as Dean. I'm shortly coming to the end of my tenure. So lots of retrospection going on. I've also spent the past year on secondment with Wellcome, doing some work for them, looking at the impact of their research culture initiatives on the HE sector. And I'm also part of the REF PCE pilot panel, one of the pilot panels. So that experience, I think, is relevant into some of the insights today. So this is not a how-to guide. It is practical, and I hope that you'll walk away with some honest insights about our chosen approaches at Leeds. Maybe some inspiration for your own work. It's by nature retrospective. It's interesting looking back. You know, I could never have written a programme grant, for example, on the work that we've done. We've had to push ahead, we've had to turn back, we've had to learn fast, and we've had to fail as well. And hopefully some of that will come across in the next 20 minutes or so. So I thought I would begin with this slide, which I put together, and this was inspired by a slide that Karen Strubantz and Ben Bleasdale, they run a research culture consultancy, culture-based consulting. They, as well as lots of other fabulous initiatives they work on, at Warwick last year, I think it was, they gave this kind of early timeline of research culture evolution. And I've chosen to expand that by representing, you know, of course, this is selective, this is not exhaustive, that couldn't possibly fit onto one slide. But I want you to see the enablers of good research culture initiatives and progress at various levels of the system that we work in. And really great that Lizzie has kind of seeded the ground for that structural view and that importance of the systemic influences on research and research culture. It's really worth acknowledging the foundations that we're building on here. And I think this systems thinking or systems lens is really helpful when we think about power and responsibility. You know, whose responsibility is it for research culture change? So I won't go through this in detail. I will leave this with you after the talk. But you can see this kind of progress along the top line here from the funders. This has been fairly steady, you know, from sort of the early teens, I suppose, when REF introduced environment in 2014, through some of the learned societies and trusts and foundations, doing quite a lot of consultations, surveys. You know, we often refer to it as poking the bear. You know, really surfacing some of the issues that we as scientists and researchers and professionals really feel, but had perhaps not been documented publicly. People hadn't really said that out loud for a range of interesting reasons. The sort of government funders, I think, really escalated attention on research culture around 2021-22, and this was quite a big cash injection for some universities, so those within England, through the Enhancing Research Culture programme. And interestingly, look then what happens at the university level. So you get this flurry of activity around about 21-22. So lots of institutions, including my own, were appointing deans or heads of research culture. Lots of strategies and action plans were coming out. Glasgow were doing this a little bit ahead of time, and there were you know, heads of research culture or researcher development, of course. This is very long-lived before this. But it was really with that carrot, I suppose, and the enabler of some decent funding around 21-22, which I think really focused minds within universities, and we started to see programmes really being systematised then. The sector in that middle tranche, sorry, I'm dotting around a little bit here, but you know, these we've got government initiatives as well within here, and sector-wide bodies, including UKRIO, research integrity was part of the conversation very early on, researcher development to looking at the metric tide in 2015, looking at responsible metrics from DORA in 2012, and through the evolution to QARA and beyond. So yeah, I find this progression endlessly interesting, but I think it shows, one of the main things it shows for me is that huge lever of cash actually within research culture. Research culture doesn't come for free. We really need resource to be able to do that. So universities are relatively late to get on the bus, I think, here. Some early adopters, but you see that flurry coinciding with the ERC, Enhancing Research Culture Fund in 2021. So I'm going to take you through some reflections on what's worked for research culture at the University of Leeds. Now, notice this is context dependent. So Leeds Uni is a large research intensive institution. We're a very complex community, 9,000 staff, 37,000 students, 7 faculties, 40 schools, more than 80 cross-cutting research units. So through my work with, the PCE pilot at the moment, when we've been really scrutinising returns from much smaller institutions, it's been really interesting to look at different approaches depending on size and what works in different places. I would also say quite candidly that the University of Leeds is quite administratively heavy, although that is changing. But it has been very open-minded and I think quite forward-thinking with research culture. I think, early on embodied by my post in 2021 being sort of one of the first academic leads, I think it's fair to say, in research culture in the UK. So this question, of course, what's worked is not straightforward. Okay, so typical academic view here. I'm going to deconstruct the question. So what do we mean by worked, right? Well, and this, of course, goes back to lots of things Lizzie was talking about in terms of assessment. What do we mean by what research culture initiatives have worked? Does it mean that we've got a raised awareness? Are people really understanding what we mean by research culture? I've spoken to so many people about research culture, and I thought, when I started my role, it would be, the first 6 months or so really defining research culture, and then we'd crack on. It's not been like that at all. It's been an ongoing process of defining research culture for people new into the sector, into the university, into this programme, redefining it, I think, as political events unfold. Interestingly, I've noticed quite a few people claim not to know what it means, and actually they are doing amazing research culture initiatives. So sometimes it's a question of identifying or recognizing some of the things they're doing. So for example, at Arts and Humanities, I sit in an Arts and Humanities faculty. They may say, oh, well, we don't do open research. Of course they do. Participatory research, co-production is absolute bread and butter for lots of Arts and Humanities scholars. So sometimes it's a case of just joining that up and pointing out that actually you do and you are. Can we tick off this question of whether it's worked if we've raised everyone to those basic standards? And I really liked Lizzie's explication of hygiene factors earlier on. Does it? We don't want to make research culture a competition, right? So I think it may sound boring, might sound quite kind of pedestrian, but just getting people to those hygiene standards is a basic requirement. Not everybody is in a position to do these kind of stellar, expensive, resource-heavy initiatives. So is that a measure of that it works? Is it about palpable improvements in inclusive, equitable, open research practices? So this keyword here is palpable. Culture is what we feel, right? And that might sound a little bit hand-wavy and abstract, but I don't think we can put that aside. Culture is really on the ground, the grassroots, how work feels. Is it about a strong PCE submission? No comment right now. Again, sort of sticking with this theme of defining what's worked. How do we know? What is our evidence? Is it that vibe, the way that people think and feel? Is it about adoption or adaptation of research culture initiatives? For me, that is absolutely a seal of approval. If somebody is, you know, looking at an example of practice, maybe at another institution, maybe in the next door office, and taking that on board themselves, you know, I can go home happy that day. So I do take that as a mark of success. Is it about university KPIs? We can quite quickly arrive at this tyranny of metrics, and I won't expand on that because Lizzie's talked about this at length. But for example, through our scope consultation a couple of years ago, we came up with 85 metrics. We've boiled that down through the scope framework, actually. But, you know, this really can be quite counterproductive if we focus on moving the dial, shifting the dial by, you know, quant measures, which may be spurious indicators of research culture without reflection, then, you know, we're not in a good place. So I'm often found in meetings just really calling for a return to a simpler view. So what makes people feel more engaged in their work? What's going to sustain this movement? So we need enough people in the movement to really make it effective. And we need a long-term vision really to sustain this and make it stick and see this work over generations. So our vision at Leeds has always been that research culture has to be a community movement. This is the approach we've taken from the beginning. Rather than a top-down mandated set of practices and behaviours, we've really focused on engaging with the community, identifying ambassadors and champions quite organically through the community, with an eye to EDI, of course, because not everybody is as visible as others when it comes to research culture. But who is out there living and doing this stuff? Who's using inclusive recruitment? You know, rather than this kind of list of expectations coming from your dean or the VC, it's really been about empowering units to reform their own cultures at the place where it's felt, and trying to kind of broker those relationships so we're not duplicating effort. So that sometimes, to be honest, has felt like a choice for me. So do I go with, you know, the senior exec, or do I go with the community? And it's a big old community here. The downside of that is that there has been some top-down cynicism, I've got to say, some difficult conversations with budget holders, some financial drawbacks in doing that. And I've got to say sometimes some burden on those that can least afford it. You know, those very, very busy people, ECRs, that are so clear-sighted on research culture, but have very little time and resource to do it. But that's what we've gone with. We've pushed through, and I don't regret that. It has not compromised the work that we've done, and it's certainly not compromised our external profile. That's been really good, because you have this ready-made, you know, army of ambassadors that talk, they tell people elsewhere about what we're doing and what's working. So this is the kind of structure for the next few slides. A quick rundown of what's really helped research culture improve at Leeds. One is this institution that really does take research culture seriously. You know, our PVC for research and innovation, I think very early on spotted an opportunity and really put some resource behind research culture, allowed us to consult the community early, continuously. And I put there judiciously. You've got to really balance how much you engage. You know, too much engagement is too much time away from the things that people really need to be doing in their day-to-day work. So we've actually used quite a lot of recycling in research culture at Leeds. So I came into post 2021, so just sort of, you know, still lockdowns, in and out of lockdowns. COVID was obviously still around at that time, as now. So, for example, rather than, you know, sending out a whole new survey or consultation, we've looked at data we already have. So the previous VC here ran it's called the Big Leads Conversation, and we did a reanalysis of that data to really surface what our biggest challenges were within research culture. We've evolved, we've responded as we've gone. That has countered some of our action plans, which has actually gone out of date almost as soon as they've been approved. So we've had to really kind of evolve and keep moving. I've had a fantastic dedicated, in both senses, in the sense that they are bespoke to research culture and they are supremely committed. Our diverse central team of research culture, we sit within research and innovation services at the moment. We'll soon be moving to organisational development. Other universities have done that with a network of distributed experts rather than that central team, but that central team has worked well for us. We've had dual leadership, so myself as an academic lead, my colleague Dr. Emma Sparry as professional services lead. That has worked extremely well. We've opened up all of our staff positions to both academics and professional services, which has been a really interesting initiative, and the messaging on that has been really, really positive. We've been very action focused. We've funded projects out there in the university community. We've been pretty good at telling people about what we've been doing through external events such as this. We've aligned with other strategies internally and externally, and we've used a hell of a lot of grit. It's not been easy work, I've got to say, for a range of reasons. What's worked for us, and this is not something which has been adopted everywhere, but our written strategy has been very, very helpful in drawing some boundaries around research culture. We've used quite a meta-scientific approach, so research on research. We've taken a robust approach to business cases. We've always been data driven on what's been needed, and that's really helped when we've had pushback within the university. We've recognised that shared responsibility. I've convened a range of working groups. That has not been universally popular, but I think it has worked. I'm saying not universally popular because it's additional burden for those that are involved. We've had a decent external website. That sounds like an easy win. It's not always been so, but that's been absolutely transformational for us in linking up externally. I'm just going to speed up a little bit with an eye on time. So we have used our written strategy as a guide. So we launched this in 2023. It's made up of 4 strategic objectives. This isn't really the place to go through the detail of that, but for me, the point here is that it's been a really helpful set of boundaries. So these are 4 quite big bins, right? So it's about diverse forms of research activity, EDI, open, and development in a nutshell. And it's really helped when people come to me and say, what about car parking? What about catering? What about climate sustainability? You know, we absolutely can't do everything. So I've just been able to go to those 4 bins in the strategy and say, it's not what we're focusing on right now. That's been a tough call sometimes. You can make the case that everything is culture, but that strategy has been very good at kind of holding back some of the sort of spiraling demands, I would say, on research culture, delineating it. We've responded as we've gone. So in the early days, it was really about the foundational work, that senior buy-in, that community consultation, working out what our success measures are. That took a couple of years. We then launched our written strategy. We started to allocate funding and coming up with equitable processes for doing so. In 2025, we've really kind of pivoted from that sort of centralized guidance of this is what we think you should be doing or could be doing, to really more of a kind of service-based model of, you know, in faculty schools and other types of units, finding out what they're doing and really enabling that by joining things up. So more of a kind of consultancy or influence model rather than kind of setting the agenda. And then as time goes on, we will be, well, we're started now, of course, very busy with providing faculties and units with data that they need to evidence their activities and progress and impact in research culture. We've aligned with lots of other strategies. This has really helped. This is a visual taken from our written strategy. It's been very useful to see the role of research culture strategically within wider initiatives internally and externally. Research culture as an enabler of the Race Equality Charter, Athena Swan, for example, people and culture strategy at government level. It's a key kind of cog in that whole ecosystem. As I said, we've convened quite a lot of working groups, and I remember a funder colleague saying to me, you know, have you thought about the research culture of having so many groups? You know, this has been a pretty tough sell at times, I've got to say, and it's been essential, I would say, in the early days. This is quite an old slide. These have really kind of evolved over time. Some have tasked and finished as they were supposed to do. We've had a clear kind of outcome from some of these groups. Others are more ongoing. Responsible metrics, as you can see there on the left, that now has kind of broadened out more into research data more in general. So having these kind of homes and leaders for each of these aspects of research culture has been very useful. It's a lot of meeting time, but has been very helpful for building capacity and allowing people to find a hook for them, what is most useful to them or interesting to them within research culture, and then getting involved. We've provided time and cash for research culture work. Through the Research England funding, we were able to fund a range of projects throughout the community. And then support those projects and celebrate them when they've come to fruition. We've been really transparent about how that money's been used throughout, the kinds of things that people have bidded for money on. Are they to enhance the research culture of ongoing projects, or are they completely new and sort of dedicated remedial initiatives for areas where things have gone wrong or have been unsustainable? We've been open about, you know, the outcomes of these projects. So, you know, for now, we're really feeling that push to evaluation. We're really needing to evidence, you know, what bang have we got for our buck. We've been transparent about that. We think about MEL, so monitoring, evaluation and learning, just documenting what the money has gone to in the round in an at-a-glance slide has been very, very helpful. This is not the whole story, of course. This is just provision. We need to think about uptake and impact as the following two stages. One initiative that I'm really proud of is our Positive Action initiative for the career development of researchers who are disabled, women, or from marginalised ethnic backgrounds. This was an entirely data-driven initiative. We had to build an absolutely bulletproof case for legal and for HR that, you know, this drop-off of academics at the senior pre-professorial grades with those protected characteristics and at the intersections is a real thing. And we've been then able to provide some funding, which has translated to time and other forms of support for people within with those protected characteristics. We're now in our second round of that Positive Action Fund, and we'll be tracking the impact of that funding over time. Of course, that is tricky as well, because, you know, do we really want to be adding additional burden in terms of engaging for evaluation those people who are time poor? So we've had to think quite creatively about how we get that data from those people who we've given time, and we don't want to be taking their time away through evaluation, but still, you know, evidencing impact. Yeah, it's a puzzle. My team are diverse in many different senses. What I really want to pull out of this slide, again, as I mentioned, this dual leadership between academic and professional services. The rest of them are domain experts. So within HR, within EDI, within data, within research and development, within REF. Each of my team represents a different sphere of expertise within the whole research culture ecosystem. And we've had a really clear offer. Please don't try and digest all of this. This is just to show that we've made public what we do and what we can offer to the community. So operational, advocacy-based and funding-based services, roughly. We've had a decent external website, and, you know, that was a minor battle and an ongoing one, but it has served us so well. In sharing best practice, for people coming to us for lessons learned and asking actually what's under the hood. This is not just the big shiny kind of impact at the end. You know, what have been the pain points going forward? One example of this is one of our most visited areas of the website is when we started to pre-release interview questions, and we wrote a blog about that and kind of a how-to guide. This is going back quite a few years now, but that's had really good uptake in the sector. We've taken time to celebrate and share our practice, you know, so through our Research Culture Uncovered podcast, for example, through our scope paper, so we published on how scope was used for our metric selection, through our awards ceremonies, through speaking at conferences. We've made that really open and transparent. This is Twitter. This is going back quite a way, so pre-X. Lots of people really keen to share their success through our Research Culture Awards, so really nice. So it's not all been easy, as I said. We've needed a big ladle full of grit as we've gone. So what's been challenging? So we've had, and I'm sure you're aware, this opposition in the sector, this perception that there is some kind of trade-off between research culture and research quality has been a pain, to put it briefly. So we've always been working on evidencing those links between culture and quality. That data is still quite patchy, to be fair, but we are tackling this opposition head-on with data. The additional burden has been challenging. As I said, you don't get research culture for free, but what you can do is identify areas of existing good practice and surface that. That's not free, but it's, you know, fairly easy win relatively. Because we've had times of plenty through the Research England funding, there's been times when we've been seen as the rich uncle within the university and been asked to plug financial gaps elsewhere, and we've had to be really principled in what we've been able to help out elsewhere, and that's been, you know, quite difficult to say no to sometimes, particularly within the EDI space. The funding models that we've got are short term, and that's made it really hard to plan over the scope of more than sort of 12 months ahead. So that's been something to grapple with over the years. And as I said, this scope of research culture funding, you know, when everything is relevant, everyone wants a piece of it. You want to go to all the meetings. People want you at all of the meetings. We've needed to engage selectively but broadly. We just can't do it with the size of the team we have. The ambassadors that I mentioned out there in the community have done a lot of work for us, but this scope of the research culture programme, timed by an incredibly large university, has made it quite a busy time. Bear in mind that I'm 0.6 and the team are mainly full-time, but you know, they're not a huge team. What's not worked, I'm nearly out of time. This wasn't intentional. What can I say here? We've failed on certain things, largely related to burden. So our surveys have had quite poor uptake, I would say. Survey fatigue is real. Our culture cafes have been dwindling, actually, despite a range of approaches to getting those on. That's been quite challenging as well. Our action plans, as I've said earlier, have needed to be updated a lot. We did write a kind of 5-year action plan. Wouldn't do that again. So to sum up, we have been a grassroots movement. We've been integrated with other services internally and externally. We've had a meta-scientific approach. As I said, we've been externally engaged. So each of those things have been real enablers for us. So thank you. That's slightly longer than I expected, but just within time. Thanks for listening.